Hello, and welcome back to Pass the Torch Legacies in Jewelry. My name is Naja de Savandist, and today we have Michael Boyd on the podcast. I have been a fan of Michael Boyd's work for years. And I really want to preface that if you have not seen his work, the experience will be enhanced if you go and you look up his work before this conversation begins. I will be posting a few pictures of some of his pieces on the Pass the Torch Jewelers Instagram page. You can find me there. He has done something with lapidary and metal that I have never seen before. He is a pioneer in this space of sculptural jewelry. He's the reason why I own a lapidary machine. Him and his nephew Alex, I saw what they could do with inlay and doublets and just mounds of stone inset in a bracelet. They just do such amazingly cool things, imaginative things, unique things. Michael is also a Colorado jeweler, and it is really important to me to elevate and promote and talk about Colorado-based jewelers because that is my community. Michael, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. I'm really excited for our conversation. I do not live that far away from your studio. I would love to come in person sometime and visit and learn from you. Here's our conversation. I hope you enjoy. Michael Boyd, thank you so much for joining Pass the Torch, Legacies in Jewelry. Welcome. I have been a huge fan of your work for years, so this means a lot to me that you would join today.
No, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about what sort of started off your journey in jewelry?
Oh boy, let's see. The first jewelry I ever made, I think it was silversmithing. I was 12. It was a summer art school arts class and fabrication kind of stuff. And so I had started making jewelry early on. My primary focus in the arts was painting and ceramics. Any formal education I had, and I never finished college. Was painting and ceramics. So then I was doing a show for a gallery in New York metro area. It was painting, and she was she had come through Denver. I had a studio in a loft in Lodo in lower downtown. Actually, they tore down the building to build the ballpark. Yeah, we had an amazing space there, like 6,000 square feet loft, and
Wow.
yeah, it was really cool. Denver's changed a lot. But anyway, she came to the studio. She saw the jewelry bench. She saw the jewelry I was making. She had two-dimensional and three-dimensional work in her gallery, uh, contemporary clay and and she wanted me to do jewelry too. So I did a show with her that was painting and jewelry, and jewelry just took over my life after that. So
Well, and
that's
I
it.
truly would consider you to be a sculpture artist who uses the means of jewelry to create your work.
hmm You know, I it's a hard thing to define, you know, uh, craft, art, whether it's flat craft like a painting or three dimensional. I think it's really all the same thing to me. It's just the mediums are different. So whether it's metal, clay, or or paper or canvas. So, and,
Were you always drawn to working with stones, or did that develop over time?
well, I think one thing growing up in the West, my my mother was a painter. She did Pratt graduate work at Parsons. My father was a scientist, and um, our life had, there was a lot of outdoor stuff, whether it was, my parents were in the mycological society, so, collecting mushrooms or, raw, everything. We just spent a lot of time doing all kinds of stuff like that. And of course, like as a kid, I would always pick up rocks and whatnot. So, um, yeah, I think collecting rocks. Um, was really a big thing when we were kids. So That's a lot of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think any element of your childhood imagination has sort of made its way into some of your designs?
Um, boy, I think, I mean, in the sense, just bringing up the whole childhood thing, I think, you know, for me, the creative process is an exploration, and that's when we're probably in tune to it most is when we are children. So I would say yes. Yeah. Um, and influences, you know, uh, I would say, you know, natural stuff, botanical kind of anthropomorphic, zoomorphic, that kind of thing. Um, I'm drawn to. And then probably the other influences that are strong for me were some painters, like two and three dimensional work, big abstract stuff, starting with Pollock. Diebenkorn was a favorite of mine. Francis Bacon, sort of the mid-century modern kind of, and post during and prior, sort of just abstract painting was was my love in that area. So those are
Yeah,
probably my interests.
if someone asked me to describe your work to someone who had never seen it, I would describe it as childlike imagination with shapes met with very serious, very technical skills and technique. Because
Mm,
some of the things that you do, very few people are able to even come close to, especially when I look at some of the stones that you set into stones.
mhm.
That has to have taken you a long time to learn, and it's something that I really deeply respect.
Well, it was an evolution, the stone on stone thing. So I had a show I was showing in Taos and Santa Fe, and really the whole stone on stone thing came from, buying old, like I remember buying a box of old stones from a jeweler at a pawn shop, and that was funny because I used my rent money, my mortgage money to buy these rocks. Anyway, but they were like the little black onyx squares, like the signet rings, and they'll put like eagles or metal components on top of that. So I had some of those, and that's when I started experimenting with that kind of layer, and um, and I did an interview with Ornament Magazine, and then again with Jewelry Artist, Lapidary Journal, and they kept asking me what it was. And they kept saying, so Lapidary Journal coined the phrase stone on stone, um, from that collection of work, my early work. And so, yeah, and so, I mean, it wasn't, the term stuck for stone on stone, and then it just became a genre. Everybody started doing it. So, um,
Not everybody, very few people I think can do it, especially to your level. Don't sell yourself short. I've been a big fan of your work for many years. It's wonderful to meet the artist behind the art.
thank you.
Um, are there any particular materials and techniques that you're experimenting with right now that is new to you?
I think it's, one thing that I see, like with beginning artists, what happens is that you bounce around a lot stylistically, that kind of thing. I think the longer you do it, the slower that evolution becomes. So so the body of work also becomes more cohesive and less scattered. So I think the whole experimenting with new ideas and forms, is a slow process. So some of the things that we're doing is like some of the different settings, like um, we're doing something we call a cutter's bezel, where we put the back plate on the stone and then cut the stone. and then so the bezel slides over the whole thing. So
Right.
there's no break between the gold and the silver. Um, and also it's a very economic way, especially with gold, because you can make a step bezel that way with very little metal. Um, so little things like that. As far as um, other processes and techniques, you know, people ask me if I draw my pieces beforehand. And I think I've done this so long that it's a mental image in my head. My drawings are in my head. And I think what happens is as I'm making a piece, I'm thinking, oh, I could do this and I could do that. And that's when that sort of exploration and the play comes in. So as I'm making a piece, oftentimes by the time I'm done with that piece, in my head, I've designed two or three more pieces. And I think that's the evolution of that. For me, the evolution of the creative process in the work I do. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I am brand new in my
Mhm.
lapidary journey. I am just right at the genesis of it. I am trying to figure out how to buy the best stones, or at least sometimes, not the most expensive stones, but the ones that ultimately can cut really well. Do you have any advice
Mhm.
for someone who's just sort of starting
What
out
kind
in
of equipment
lapidary?
did you get? What are you cutting with?
I
Do-
have a cab machine and a trim saw, and that's it. I don't have a flat
uh-huh.
lap yet.
Okay. My advice would then be just come down, hang for a day. So,
I
and
would
we'll
love
show
to.
you. I have a room full of rocks. We have a separate rock room. So, and
And it just
yeah,
comes down to seeing a million of them and then you figure it out.
I have 30 years worth of rocks. And I have no, I have no retirement, anything like that. I'm going to retire on a pile of rocks. So basically,
I'm going to quote you on that. That's
okay,
wonderful. Looking back at your career, are there any standout pieces or projects that hold a special meaning to you?
that's tough. I think I look back and maybe if there is some of the larger, sculptural pieces. I did a series of teapots and some other larger pieces. Some of those were fun, and I'd like to get back to that. But I think, again, it's hard. It's like, do you have a favorite child or something like that? It's hard to say. And in some of looking over the questions you asked, if there was one rock or one material that 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 I had to use and nothing else, I think um, yes, what it would be, and I think it's like I don't know if I could do that. It's like I stone for me is like like paint was in that it's a palette,
Hmm,
so I can pick all these things from my palette to build this piece. And so, a lot of color theory comes into play, um, that kind of thing. So,
that's
um,
really cool. I'd never thought of it that way.
yeah, I think I think to make, to use stone in a piece of jewelry, for me, visually, the most effective pieces, the most successful pieces are one that really truly integrate the two mediums. And so many people have a preconceived idea of what a stone is, and that's an 8 by 10 oval or whatnot. But, it's like if you were to sit down and flip through a Rio Grande catalog and pick out all your little metal components to make your jewelry, that's what people do with stone. You don't need that that preconceived notion of what a stone is. Um, you can cut shapes and forms that you're the same shapes and forms you're using in metal, and then design wise, you have something that truly integrates. Um, and so I think it's a paradigm shift away from what traditionally we think of as stone is into think of it as a medium. It's a piece of wood. It's a piece of clay. It's something you're going to shape and form, not somebody else shape and form for you. And that's for me, that's the most successful design with stone and metal. So
Yeah, I think it would, for most people, be counterintuitive to consider stone to be malleable or be able to be manipulated. And that I think
mm,
is what has really generated your hand. I see one of your pieces and I know it's immediately yours because you almost have that ethos behind each piece.
yeah, it's part of that process. It's integrating the two materials and treating it as a material, not I can't imagine, spending my life designing around other people's stone. But, really, and also, the stone is such a mystery to most jewelers. But in reality, you have a learning curve, you know, cutting, and each material is different. That learning never stops. But, um, but honestly, cutting the stone is the easiest part of what we do. And people think it's the opposite. They think you can fabricate a piece of jewelry, but the stone is a mystery to them. And really, it's the opposite. The stone is the easiest part of the fabrication of what we do. So,
Can I just nerd out for a second and ask you
yeah,
what your
sure.
favorite tool is?
My teeth. I think
Please elaborate.
I don't know. I think if I think of something I use all the time, like whether it's a pencil or a solder pick or something, you know, I thought it was a funny
That's
answer, but
awesome.
it's kind of true. So,
That's a great answer.
my favorite tool after that, I don't know. That's a hard one.
Is
I
there
have
one that you
tools.
use consistently on almost every piece?
Um, pliers probably come in there, and I have a pair of pliers that are flat on one and sort of an oval rounded on the other. I use those a lot because if you bend a piece of metal with sharp edges, you scar it. So it serves as both, flat and a round. So um, I don't know. We in the shop itself, bigger equipment. Um, for lapidary, we use Diamond Pacific equipment. So we have a Titan and a Genie, so probably that. We have a Planisher, a Whomper, and I don't know how I lived without it. We got that a few number of years back, and it's constantly being used. I don't know. It's hard. I can't pinpoint it to one.
Those are good answers. Those are good answers.
So,
Can you
cool.
talk about some of the challenges that you've faced in your jewelry career?
Yeah, it's always money because I don't do any production. And, if you want to make money, you do production. So you design something and you just, you bang them out. But, for me, I was your classic Ritalin child, 88 running around. I had two speeds and that was weld and off. I was either asleep or running. And I think, that continues on. And if I do this, if repetition, especially in something like that, it puts me to sleep. I dread the idea of doing production. If I wanted to make money, that's what I should do, but I don't. And so doing one of a kind, doing only doing couture has its drawbacks, and those drawbacks are financial. Otherwise, success. I've been, I'm very lucky. I'm very grateful and whatnot because I have been successful.
What have you experienced as the industry has evolved and changed, especially I would think that the jewelry world has done a pretty major shift in the last 5 to 7 years. Does that have any impact on you and your business, or are you pretty consistent in regards to what you produce and how you connect and interact with the world?
People, I'll see people in their they'll say, okay, I'm going to do a show, and they'll start designing work that they think they're going to sell. And I think they're designing work for someone else's aesthetic. And that's, I think, the first mistake. I say design work for yourself, design around your own aesthetic, and people with a similar aesthetic will find you. You don't need to go out and find other people. Do what you love to do. It's going to be better work. It's going to be the best work you're going to do if you're doing something for yourself in your head, kind of do what you want to do. And then people with, again, with your similar aesthetic are going to find you. You don't need to find them. You need to put yourself out there so they can find you. But I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think being your first client and making things that you love, I agree with you. I think you make better work. And that is somewhere where I would love to eventually end up. I think in my journey at this point in time, I don't have the skills to make what I would love to wear. So I'm
Hmm.
working to develop those skills. Do you have any advice for someone who's just starting out, who's wanting to just learn, be a sponge?
Um, yeah, I mean, the more you do, the better you're going to get. It's repetition. It's, you know, a skill set like I have from doing 30 years of work. Um, and versus, and I go down the line. Um, like Ethan's a very good craftsman, talented craftsman. Um, Josiah has 10 more years of experience. I've been making jewelry my entire life. 30 of it, more than 30, 35 years of it have been solely focused on jewelry. But it's that repetition is what's going to get you to a master level at anything. So the more you do it, the better you're going to get, the quicker it's going to be. So you just need to dedicate yourself. If you want to, you know, that process, the more hours put in, the faster you're going to get there. So
Yeah. Do you think there are any common misconceptions when it comes to your work that you would like to dispel?
I think, a lot of people when they're looking at work, they'll say, you know, oh, that looks Egyptian or that looks modern or they try to define it. And, they try to say, oh, that's Southwest, that looks Native American, that looks Asian, and, you know, uh, at first thought, it's like, it can be cringeworthy, but taking it into perspective, the fact that they're having to label it or their brain is searching for a label means it's nothing they've seen before. They're trying to identify it. So in a sense, someone saying, "Oh, it's like it's like Southwest," and I know it's not, but and the whole thought of that is sort of cringeworthy. But at the same time, it's a compliment in that I know they're trying to label it, and
Mm,
if they're trying to label it, it means they can't, they don't. It's not something they've seen before. They're searching for something to compare it with. Yeah, you know, I want to step back to what you were talking about as far as just the evolution of being, the hours we put in, all that kind of stuff. It's like, um, if you want to build a fence around your property, um, you have to do it one fence post at a time. You just can't automatically have a fence. So it's in your head, pare it down to simple things. Um, One fence post is an easy task. It's going to take time to get all of them, but it's one post is not overwhelming, whereas an entire fence is. So I guess just think of it as that. Think of one skill level that you want to perfect and go for it, and then you slowly start adding. Does that
I
make
love
sense?
it. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I like that analogy a lot. Is there a particular skill set that comes to mind for you that felt like the largest or the most intimidating post to set?
Faceting would come to mind. Um, you know, I'm not a motorhead. I'm not a technical person. I sort of, the whole math, the technicality of cutting a facet stone is just, I don't want to do it. It's the repetition thing maybe again. But so I think maybe there are those, but I think I just, if it doesn't excite me, I just don't do it. So
And it feels like when you're excited about something, it feels more approachable to be able to
sure,
sit down
absolutely.
and set.
It becomes an exploration. It's play. And if you look at my bench or through my drawers and whatnot, I have probably literally hundreds of unfinished things around. And and that's okay because and probably maybe 25% of the time I spend at my bench, I do things that just sort of never get finished. It's an exploration. And people ask me, well, how can you afford to spend all that time and not produce anything? And my reply to that is I can't afford not to, because that's how I ended up where I am. I think students have a tendency to make something so precious that it stifles them, and really, they have to have a finished product. And if it's something they're trying and it's not working, or if it's something they break, if you break a stone, if you melt a component, so what? And I tell students a lot that, you'll go out to dinner and buy a $40 bottle of wine, no problem. You're doing that for your own entertainment and your own pleasure. Um, Take that attitude to your bench, and just allow yourself to have fun. And if you can play, that's how you're going to discover new processes. That's your movement forward, that exploration.
You mentioned teaching, and I know that you have people there in your workshop who study underneath you, from you.
Mhm.
How would you describe your ethos when you think about how you want to teach?
Probably just that, not um, free them up. Again, I see students struggling with just the whole need to have a finished product. I don't I don't teach anything where we go through and have a finished product. I teach where we have finished components that they can take and apply to their work. And teaching was never something I sought out to do. Um, the first time I taught something sort of like on that level, a master's class, I think it was 2002, that SNAG, Society of North American Goldsmith, their convention was in Denver.
Hmm.
And I spoke at that, and I spoke and also taught a workshop. And that was the first time I ever did sort of a higher end sort of national level workshop, and I was petrified. But people keep asking me, and it's like, oh, they're really nice. I can't say no, kind of thing. So I never sought out teaching gigs, um, for the first dozen or so years, and I still really don't. People. Um, the few times, we put workshops together here in the studio, but other than that, I don't seek out teaching gigs. It's people asking me. So it was never my focus or my intent to be, to teach, but I love it. And what I love about it is that, you have 30, not 30 people, you have 10 people in a class, and every single one of them does, you know, there's things, everybody has something to offer. There's something they do, there's something, I learn a lot from teaching. It's a two-way street. And the other thing is just, it's a connection that I often don't see with my work. I'll do it, I'll send it to a gallery. I don't, um, more often than not, I don't have any interaction with the people who buy it or wear it or whatnot. And so teaching sort of helps bridge that gap a little bit. I love that part, and I've been doing, I'll do one show a year. We're going to do two shows this year. I've been doing the West Palm Beach Fine Craft Show, and then we're going to do a show in New York coming up in this summer. So that's a time when I actually interact directly with people who are buying and wearing my work. So,
Yeah, I had never thought about that. I knew that you were showing in galleries, and I guess it had never dawned on me that there would be this degree of separation almost naturally between you and then your work and the life that it goes and lives after it leaves your workshop.
mhm. And it's a very important one because, a piece of jewelry is you're interacting with it. And I I don't wear jewelry. I don't wear anything. Um, it's just I don't know. I occasionally, we'll be making, like a necklace or something, and I'll say, oh, let's make that one 18 inches. And then we all wear them. But earrings are problematic because I have to just sort of imagine and visualize. I can't like try a pair of earrings on very easily.
I have a mentor who I have tried to get him to pierce his own ear so
Uh,
that he could wear his own earrings just to feel it
mhm.
because I'm constantly, wearing his pieces for him. But when he's at the bench and doing these little refinements to it, I'm like, put it in your own ear. I think more guys who are bench jewelers should pierce their own ear so that they
I
wear it
agree.
because I've also worn pieces that have been like 2 pounds.
Hmm.
And, a guy made them, but there's too
Yeah,
heavy for any woman to wear. So
exactly.
that's
I
really fun.
understand
And
that.
I'm sure with working with a lot of stones, that's something you want to be conscious of,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
making it too
Lightweight.
heavy.
Weight is huge, and that's a huge advantage when we cut our own material. Some materials will hold up like micro thin, and then you can do big pieces of stone, and people are always surprised at how light they are. So it's important.
I've always wondered a little bit about the cuffs that you make. I think your cuffs are my favorite elements of your work. Obviously, I've seen your rings, I've seen your earrings, and I've seen your
Mhm.
necklaces, but I'm fascinated by your cuffs because I think that you take extra liberty with them in the sense that they have more dimension than maybe some of
Hmm.
the other pieces, at least in what I've seen.
Hmm.
And I've always wondered what it would be like to wear one of your cuffs because they are more of a sculptural element.
Yeah. I think, one element is I always put little rollers at the end so I can get this rigid mass that goes on and it just sort of rolls off, but then it'll fit tight. Um, a lot of that stemmed from wanting, all a selection of color and materials. And say if I were to go out and buy like little 4 millimeter lapis cabochons, um, a couple bucks a piece, $1 a piece, whatever. But I could go out and buy the same material. I could buy a strand of 60 beads um, for $15. So all of a sudden, um, pennies versus dollars. And so it was a really good way for me to get some materials that I wanted economically. It was like huge. So at that point, then I had to really invent ways to use them. I re-drill all the beads. They have to have a hole large enough to accommodate a gauge of metal that's going to be durable. It's basically like repurposing things. I'd go to the show and like there was a series of teapots I did buy like these old Chinese teapots with maidens and dragons on them and just cut the handles, everything off and then just grind them down to a shell. So I would repurpose a lot of stuff. Stone, anything stone was it was fair game, kind of thing. So a lot of that. like the cuffs and the way I use the beads or whatever, were really, again, came out of just a way to buy, materials I wanted in different forms, but also adapt them to what I wanted.
What's next for you?
Oh, that's a tough question. You know, it's like I'm old, it's like, you know, but retirement, I don't think I can. I don't, you know, I'm unemployable by any other means. I'd be living under a bridge if I didn't make jewelry. Um, really, I don't know. I mean, I'll do this just till I die, I guess. And again, the whole the whole process, of playing, experimenting, it always keeps it fresh. There's always a new adventure. There's a new trail to hike. There's a new country to visit. There's a new culture to explore, and it's that sort of attitude going into what I'm doing that, again, it just keeps everything fun and exploration and exciting, and there's new material to find. Material is really fun when you're cutting stone because, anything is fair game. Um, not only traditional materials, but, fossil materials. I have some pieces that were, so if you know what a doublet and a triplet is, a triplet traditionally for an opal, a layer of black, a thin layer of opal, and then usually clear quartz. So I was taking cicada insect wings. I was laminating them between two pieces of optical quartz, clear quartz, and cutting those as stones. So it's that kind of exploration, and also gives you the ability to, you know, look at materials that you would never think of using in a piece of jewelry. Say like, a cincata, an insect wing. And I have a bunch. I could, hey guys, could someone in the samples drawer grab the pieces with insect wings or the feathers too? That's cool. So I'll show you. I'll show you some examples.
Are you using Hexol to make your doublets?
Yeah. Oh, it's the closest thing to an archival epoxy that you will ever have. It will never yellow. It has the best heat resistance. It's just incredibly stable and durable stuff. Your pieces will in 100 years. If you use, cheap epoxies to make, say, a doublet or a triplet, 50 years that glue is going to start to yellow. It's gonna deteriorate. So Hexel is my number one choice for anything like that.
I'm making some doublets and working on a lapis lazuli inlay ring right now that when I finish up, I would love to bring down to you for some feedback and critique.
Yeah, you're welcome to. Hexel is a game changer because I know that the piece I do is going to be around in 100 years. You know.
So just to talk about that for just a second, I want to see if the way that I'm doing it is also the way that you are doing it. Are you
hmm
hexoling the piece and then using a vacuum to pull the hexol through the stones?
Okay, so you can. Now, if you're using a clear stone, what happens is, like if you're doing a doublet with optical, something clear on top of something that's not. In that case, I'm not heating it up. You can heat them up to cure them faster. I'll debubblize the glue, in a vacuum, whatnot. But then I want that to cure really slowly because if I take that piece and then put it in the little toaster oven, which is where we cure the glues, air expands when it gets warm. So all of a sudden you'll have bubbles that you never had before. So it can be tricky. Most of the time, if it's opaque, we cure them quickly. Otherwise, we don't. So if you're using lapis, um, you can use a vacuum for penetration as well as to debubblize if you have clear stone. If you're going to treat a stone in any way, it's something you need to disclose. If a sapphire is heat treated, if it's fracture sealed, most emeralds will say they've been quote unquote oiled, but really that means they've been fracture sealed with a two-part resin or epoxy. So if the stability of the stone, if the glue has, if you're doing it to keep the stone stable, you're going to say it's treated, just like you would say treated turquoise or versus natural turquoise. So the one thing in there, there's a fine line. There's things you should disclose and things you shouldn't. If you're taking something, like a super soft turquoise that you could write on a chalkboard with, and impregnate it with, you know, you treat the stone, then you disclose it. So if it affects the outcome of that stone, like color or that kind of thing, then you want to disclose. Okay, so here's a piece of this is optical quartz. This is natural quartz crystal. And inside, I've layered this with a wing. This is a cincata wing.
Wow.
Um, then, it goes from something like that to a cut finished piece. And
What we can do is take a picture of it and put it up on the Pass the Torch Instagram so that people can reference it to see for those who are listening.
so here's a piece, and the bottom it's quartz, and then and inside is this is a feather. This is from an Argus pheasant.
Oh, very
So
cool. So, for those who don't know, a doublet is where you layer multiple stones and you epoxy them, like we were talking about with Hexol, together to kind of be one stone. And a triplet is just 3 layers.
yeah, doublet 2 layers, triplet 3 layers. Fossil material can be really fun and fascinating.
I noticed in some of your pieces that you have carved pearls, and I have heard that pearls can be very dangerous to carve because their molecules are like barbs, and if you inhale it, it can actually barb itself into your lungs. Are you cutting those
Mhm.
pearls in-house?
Yeah, yeah, but there's different things. So, in nature, there's lots of toxic materials. For woodworkers, there's wood that you can't cut because it'll poison
Spores.
you. Yeah, or some rocks have arsenic in them, or this kind of thing. So there's a lot of natural materials that can harm you. The big issue with cutting stone is airborne, is dust. And, we breathe rock dust, our entire lives, but not in great quantity. So silicosis, black lung, diseases that miners get. Pottery people get silicosis a lot because clay is basically rock dust. So when we're cutting stone, you need to know the material. Most of the materials, any silicates like agate, jasper, predominantly are very safe. But what you do is you use water. So once you're using water, you eliminate any dust and you eliminate the health hazard from that. Now, there are times when if I'm drilling pearls or some shells are extremely toxic, you know, you need to know the material you're cutting. So if you're not familiar with the material, you wear a respirator. Any of these materials, I'm always using water. Water eliminates the dust and the respirator will eliminate anything else. You can do it, but you want to protect yourself. You want to do it in water, and water will also keep them cool. So, a lot of stones, most stones are heat sensitive, so they'll crack and whatnot.
Your nephew, Alex, showed me that he
Mhm.
basically jerry-rigged his own cab machine to constantly be feeding him fresh, warm water as he's cutting.
Yeah,
Because for anyone who's sat at a lapidary machine, or specifically a cab machine, knows that your hands just get soaked, and that warm
it's
water can
cold.
really be a game changer.
Yeah. I've done that for a long time. I have a constant feed. I don't recirculate, with my lapidary. It's a constant feed, and it drains, and I have hot and cold. And I've had that, for 20 some years. Because again, especially cutting stone in the winter can be, if you're cutting all day and it's wet and humid and it's 10 degrees outside, it can be pretty miserable. So,
Right. And
yeah.
we live in Colorado, so it's
Hmm.
also
Yep.
dry and yeah,
As
the
well.
air is cold. Michael, this has been such a joy to connect with you. Do you have any last little tidbits or little nuggets of advice that you got early on in your career, or wish you got early on in your career that you would like to share?
Networking. And for me, it's like, you know, I had a lot of people, that were very willing and, you know, and to give me advice, to tell me to explain things. And so I guess for me, that's another aspect of teaching. It's like, this is my tribe. I can give back to them at that point. As a jeweler, I'm self-taught. And so, a lot of my information, again, came from other people. And there's a lot of those people out there. Boulder, Lou Wackler has always been a very generous and giving person when I have questions about, say, materials or whatnot. I mean, there's just a lot of those people out there. So,
I've gotten Lou Wackler's name sent to me on multiple different occasions from multiple people. I do not know this individual, but my next question to you was going to be, who would you recommend that I have on this podcast next? Lou Wackler is someone who's on my radar. Is there anyone else that comes to mind?
do you know Andy Cooperman?
I do not.
Andy Cooperman's work is brilliant. He's in Seattle, and he would be a delightful interview. He's smart, he's funny.
Michael, thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous in this conversation and to connect with
Mhm.
me. I know I reached out to you out of the blue with very little to back up my story that I was anything legitimate, but I appreciate
Okay.
you and I appreciate your time. I would love to come visit your shop sometime. Please let me know when you might be available.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. Have a good one.
You bet. Bye.
That concludes our conversation. Find him on Instagram at Michael Boyd Studio, or you can go on his website, michaelboyd.com. I am so grateful to have had this conversation. Michael, thank you so much for joining me. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast. I realize that I haven't been putting that out there yet because I'm not quite a trained podcast host yet, but only a few people have subscribed, if you will. And we have hundreds of listeners in 24 different countries all over the world, which has just blown me away. But if you subscribe, that gives me a good meter on who is continually coming back and listening to these episodes. So thank you so much for doing that if you have already. If you would like to nominate someone to be on the podcast or for me to consider to be on the podcast, I am going to create a Google form and put it on the Pass the Torch Jewelers Instagram page, and you can fill that out with all of the information there. Stay tuned, and I will see you on the next one. Have a great rest of your day.